The conference room was already full when I arrived. 50 people. Investors. Directors. The CEO sitting in the back corner watching everything. My manager stood at the front, clicking through slides. My slides. The ones I built line by line at my kitchen table at midnight. The ones I designed, tested, revised, and perfected over 3 months. He was smiling. Confident. Like he'd created them from nothing. I stayed in the back row, hands folded, face neutral. The heat behind my eyes was intense, but I didn't move. Didn't speak. Interrupting would have made me look emotional. Unstable. Desperate. I watched him describe the framework like he'd invented it himself. He talked about the ideation process, a process I'd walked him through 3 separate times because he didn't understand the core concept. He talked about the testing phase, testing I'd done alone while he was in client meetings. He talked about execution, my execution. 6 months of work. 6 months of late nights, research, failed attempts, breakthroughs, and refinement. I'd built this from nothing. From an empty whiteboard to a fully functioning system that could scale across the entire organization. And now he was standing there, taking every single credit, every achievement, every success. His voice was smooth. Practiced. He'd clearly rehearsed this presentation multiple times. But I'd never been in those rehearsals. He'd never asked for my input. He'd never said, "Let's walk through this together." When a senior executive asked who validated the framework, my manager answered too quickly. That speed told me everything. He was nervous. He knew he was lying, and his body was already preparing the next lie to cover the first one. I leaned back in my chair and decided something in that moment. This wouldn't be the end. This would be the beginning. By noon, my inbox was flooded. Congratulations messages. Praise. Thank you notes. A calendar invite for a leadership lunch in his honor. People walked past my desk without stopping. Their eyes slid away like they hadn't seen me in months. Like I was invisible. My manager walked by once, slowed down and said, "Great teamwork today." Teamwork. Like we'd built this together. Like he hadn't taken every single piece of my work and wrapped it in his name. I smiled and nodded because that's what you do when you can't scream. After he left, I opened the internal file system. Version history. Access logs. Edit trails. My name appeared everywhere, quietly stamped into the backbone of every single document. I appeared in the first draft, the second, 10th, all the way to the final version. My manager's name appeared twice, once when he forwarded the file to himself, and once when he added a title slide. The emails kept coming. One from the VP of Operations. Impressive strategic thinking. Except I'd written that strategy memo. One from a director. Love the innovative approach. The innovation was mine. Each email felt like a small knife wound. Each one represented hours of my work being handed to someone else like it was nothing. I watched the emails pile up in his inbox. Watched people congratulate him on achievements he hadn't made. And no one, not a single person, had thought to include me in those congratulations. Not even once. I didn't screenshot anything yet. I didn't forward anything to anyone. I just sat there staring at the screen, confirming what I already knew. The truth was documented. It was patient. And so was I. I closed the file and went back to my desk. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm. No one could know what I was thinking. No one could know that I was already 3 steps ahead. That evening, I went home and replayed old meetings in my head. The way my manager would interrupt when I explained technical details. How he'd rephrase my ideas seconds later and suddenly get nodded at by executives. How he'd take my exact words and present them like original thoughts. I opened my notebook and started writing. Specific instances. Patterns. This wasn't a one-off mistake. This was escalation. This was planned. I mapped out 6 months of presentations where he'd done this. 6 months of me watching my work disappear into his name. 6 months of staying silent because I thought documentation was enough. I thought doing good work would speak for itself. I was naive. A compliance reminder popped up on the company portal. Mandatory management training scheduled for the following week. Creating a culture of accountability and transparency in leadership. I read it 3 times. My pulse stayed steady. Compliance didn't schedule training like that without reason. Someone had noticed something. Maybe not my situation specifically, but enough smoke meant someone was about to start looking for fire. I remembered the first time he'd done this. 3 months ago. I'd presented an idea in a team meeting, a way to streamline our data processing. He'd listened quietly, nodded, said nothing. 2 weeks later, he presented that exact idea to senior leadership. With his name on it. I'd frozen in that meeting, unsure if I was overreacting, unsure if that's just how these things worked. Maybe I wasn't supposed to take credit. Maybe that was his job as a manager. But then it happened again. And again. Each time I told myself the same thing. Stay professional, keep your head down, let your work speak for itself. I closed my laptop and went to bed early. I needed clarity more than comfort. I needed to think. The next morning I stopped volunteering updates. I stopped offering ideas in meetings. I delivered exactly what was requested, nothing more, nothing less. I watched my manager fill the silence with his own confidence, stretching explanations thinner each time he had to speak without me there to back him up. In meetings, executives started asking follow-up questions he couldn't answer cleanly. He'd stammer, redirect, make excuses. I took notes without raising my head. When someone glanced at me during those awkward pauses, I met their eyes briefly, then looked away. No defense. No protest. No, actually, I built that part. Silence unsettles liars because it removes the opponent they prepared for. They expected me to fight. They expected me to defend myself. Instead, I gave them nothing. I was a ghost in the room. The power of silence is that it creates a vacuum. And people rush to fill vacuums. They fill them with words. Too many words. Desperate words. Words that expose the lie. My manager was starting to crack under the weight of his own deception. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened during presentations. The way he'd check the room for reactions. The way he'd talk faster when he wasn't sure if people believed him. I was watching a man slowly realize that confidence alone couldn't hold up his lie. Eventually, someone would ask the right question. Eventually, someone would demand proof. And when that moment came, I'd be ready. At lunch, I overheard 2 directors whisper about how fast the framework had come together. I smiled to myself. Fast things always leave trails. Messy trails. Things that move too quickly without proper foundation eventually crack. I finished my sandwich and went back to work. My manager was in his office with the door closed. Even from my desk I could see him pacing. But let him be uncomfortable. Let him start to wonder if anyone was questioning his story. An internal audit announcement hit midweek. Routine review. Company-wide. Everyone had to participate. My manager joked about it in the hallway, loud enough for others to hear. "We're clean," he said, laughing a little too hard. I noticed how his laugh ended too abruptly, like he'd caught himself being too loud. I noticed how he glanced around to see who was listening. I forwarded the notice to my personal work folder and added it to my timeline. Audits love documentation. They lived for documentation. They were designed to find exactly what my manager had done. I forwarded the notice to my personal work folder and added it to my timeline. That afternoon he asked me for original files just in case. His voice was casual but his jaw was tight. Just in case. Just in case of what? Just in case someone asked questions he couldn't answer. I sent him nothing. Instead, I replied politely, explaining that all materials were already stored in the company system per policy, accessible to anyone who needed them. No special favors. His reply came fast, 2 words. Got it. But the typing bubble had lasted much longer than 2 words should take. He typed something, deleted it, retyped it. He was panicking and trying to hide it. I checked my file permissions carefully. My access was intact. No locks changed. No quiet removals. That meant my manager was either confident or careless. Either way, I stayed still. He updated nothing. created nothing new. Any sudden activity would muddy the timelines, make it look like I was scrambling to document things after the fact. The truth had to look natural. At a status meeting, the compliance officer sat in the corner with a notebook. She asked neutral questions, eyes moving between faces like she was looking for something specific. Her name was Miranda, and she'd been with the company for 12 years. She was known for being thorough, methodical, the kind of person who didn't miss details or let things slide. When her eyes landed on me, I answered calmly, briefly, without embellishment. My manager jumped in immediately to clarify, talking over me, going into detail I hadn't provided. I stopped speaking immediately and looked back down at my notes. The room noticed. People always notice when someone interrupts silence. The compliance officer's pen slowed. She wrote something down and circled it. I didn't try to read it. I didn't need to. Her question had been simple. Who did the initial ideation on this framework? My answer had been one word. Team. His answer had been a 5-minute story about his vision. The contrast was everything. That evening I received an email from Miranda. Subject line, quick follow-up meeting tomorrow, 2 p.m. my office. No explanation. No context. Just a meeting request. I accepted immediately and replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. He was getting nervous. I could feel it in the way the office energy had shifted. Everyone could sense something was changing. The framework was scheduled for external partner review. Big audience. High stakes. Major clients would be there. My manager spent days rehearsing. I'd hear him in the conference rooms practicing his pitch, refining his story, getting more confident with each run-through. I stayed late one evening to observe quietly from my desk. He practiced alone in a glass conference room, pacing, using hand gestures, confident in that way that only comes from not knowing you're about to be exposed. I knew something he didn't. External reviewers demanded source attribution. They asked uncomfortable questions. They liked receipts. They were used to finding discrepancies in corporate presentations because they saw them constantly. That night, I emailed myself a clean index of documentation locations. Nothing confidential. Just path, folder names, file locations. If asked, I could direct someone to the truth without producing it myself. Direction is not accusation. It's simply an invitation to look. I shut down my computer and left before he did. I wanted him rested. Overconfidence works best when it's completely uninterrupted by doubt or fear. The day before the review, my manager stopped by my desk again. "You'll be there tomorrow," he said, not asking. "In case they need technical backup." Backup. He nodded. That was perfect. Complete visibility without any spotlight. I wouldn't have to speak unless asked. I could simply be there, present, available, and let people draw their own conclusions. I spent the rest of the day reorganizing my notes, aligning timestamps with meeting invites, approval chains, and presentation dates. Everything matched perfectly. No contradictions. No gaps. Just a clean, organized timeline that showed exactly what I'd done and when I'd done it. That night I slept deeply. No anxiety. No racing thoughts. No rehearsed speeches. I'd done nothing wrong. I was simply allowing the system to do what it was designed to do. Surface inconsistencies. I wasn't destroying my manager. His lies were. I was just letting the truth exist. The review started smoothly. My manager spoke with practiced ease, walking through the framework like he'd created it from pure inspiration. The external lead nodded, flipping through printed pages. Then came the first pause. "Can you walk us through the initial ideation phase?" The external lead asked. My manager launched into a story that skipped months of actual work. He talked about his vision and his concept, but he didn't mention research, testing phases, or any of the foundational work. The reviewer glanced at the screen showing timestamps. "Interesting," she said slowly. "Our records show earlier iterations. Dated much earlier than your timeline." Silence stretched across the room. My manager laughed lightly and waved it off as background noise, and early sketches that didn't matter. I watched the reviewer's pen slow down. She wasn't taking notes anymore. She was writing down his exact words, documenting his explanation. She was building a record of his lie, one word at a time. My heart was racing, but my face remained calm. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. The external partner had access to information he didn't know they had. They'd done their homework. They'd checked the systems. They'd traced the timeline. And now he was caught between telling the truth and maintaining his lie. He'd chosen to maintain it. He just documented that choice on record with a senior executive and the CEO watching. When she asked who authored those early drafts, my manager said my job title, not my name. The analyst handled that portion. Not even my name. Just my role. Like I was interchangeable. Like anyone could have done my work. I looked up then. Just once. That single movement caught attention. Several people in the room followed my manager's gaze to me. The CEO leaned forward slightly. The external lead's eyes locked on mine. Everyone was waiting to see how I'd react. Would I nod? Would I stay silent? Would I defend myself? All eyes landed on me, and I felt no urge to speak quickly. No panic. No need to prove myself. I simply said, I can explain the development process. I described the workflow without claiming ownership or demanding recognition. Just facts. Tools used. Approval checkpoints. The reviewer nodded, taking notes now. Real notes. Important notes. My manager shifted in his chair, suddenly uncomfortable. He tried to summarize over me, talking faster, trying to regain control. I stopped talking immediately. The contrast was sharp. The room leaned toward my silence, not his volume. The reviewer asked me one direct question. Were these iterations yours? I met her eyes directly. Yes. One word. Nothing more. Nothing less. The CEO, seated quietly at the end of the table, straightened for the first time. His posture changed. His entire expression shifted. The CEO didn't speak right away. He watched. He always did. His eyes moved from me to my manager to the external lead and back again. He was processing. He was understanding. He was seeing the pattern that had just played out in real time. After the session ended, he asked for a follow-up meeting, with compliance present. My manager's smile froze, then returned, but thinner, forced, desperate. In the hallway afterward, my manager told me not to worry. These things happen, he said, his voice trying to sound casual. Miscommunications about who did what. It'll be fine. He nodded. Inside, I marked the moment in my mind like a timestamp. Executives didn't call follow-ups for nothing. This wasn't a conversation about clarifying credit. This was an investigation. That afternoon, compliance requested access confirmation from all contributors. I responded within minutes with detailed information about what I'd built, when I'd built it, and where all the files were stored. My manager waited hours before responding. When he finally replied, his message was longer than necessary. Way too long. He was over-explaining. Over-explaining is panic wearing a business suit. I closed my inbox and waited. Compliance interviewed me first. Neutral room. Neutral tone. I answered only what was asked. I provided directions to files, not copies. I explained processes, not feelings. I didn't embellish or add drama. When they asked if I'd raised concerns before, I said no. That mattered. I hadn't accused anyone. I hadn't escalated dramatically. I had simply worked and let the work speak for itself. They thanked me and ended the meeting early. 10 minutes. That's all they needed. They had the information. They had the documentation. They had the timeline. Outside the compliance office, I passed my manager waiting in the hallway. He searched my face for clues. Gave him none. My expression was neutral. Like I just discussed the weather. That night, he emailed me again asking for alignment. His subject line said, "Need to talk." I replied politely and declined a private meeting, suggesting that any discussion include compliance. I kept it professional. I kept it documented. He didn't respond to that email. The silence was deafening. Word spread quietly through the office. People spoke softer around me. Invitations changed. I was suddenly copied on threads I'd never been included in before. My manager started canceling meetings, rescheduling, avoiding open rooms where people could observe him. The CEO requested a consolidated timeline presentation. Factual, no opinions, just data. Compliance assembled the timeline, not me. That distinction mattered. When I reviewed the draft at their request, I confirmed accuracy and nothing else. I didn't editorialize. I didn't add commentary. I just verified that the facts were correct. My name appeared naturally throughout the timeline. No emphasis, just presence. My manager's name appeared mostly in forwarding lines. The difference was subtle but devastating. Systems don't accuse. They display. And displays don't argue back. The boardroom felt colder this time. Fewer smiles. Less casual conversation. The CEO opened with a single question. Who built this? He didn't look at me. He looked directly at my manager. My manager spoke confidently at first. Too confidently, repeating his story about vision and execution. Then compliance projected the timeline on the wall. Silence followed. Complete silence. I noticed hands stop moving. Pens hover in the air. People stopped breathing, it seemed. The CEO finally turned to me. Is this accurate? He nodded. Yes. Nothing more. No elaboration. No drama. Just confirmation. The CEO leaned back in his chair, exactly as he had weeks earlier when watching my manager present, but this time the pause worked differently. It wasn't curiosity now. It was judgment forming. Final judgment. My manager swallowed hard. The room waited. My manager tried to recover, talking fast, reframing contributions, blaming delegation. He said he'd trusted me to handle the details while he provided direction. He said that's how teamwork worked. The CEO raised one finger. Stop. One word. Clean. Final. He asked compliance to explain authorship standards in the company. They did. Slowly. Thoroughly. Policy meeting reality. My manager's posture collapsed inch by inch. No yelling. No accusations. Just policy meeting reality. I watched without expression. Victory didn't feel loud. Felt precise. It felt like watching a machine work exactly as it was designed to work. The CEO asked me one last question. Why didn't you speak up sooner? I answered honestly. I trusted the process. The room absorbed that. Trust carries weight when it's proven justified. It carries more weight than any accusation ever could. The decision came immediately. Leadership reassignment. My manager was reassigned to a different department, stripped of his direct reports, removed from decision-making roles. Project ownership was corrected in all official documents. My name appeared where it belonged, as the architect of the framework. An internal review opened into management conduct. Future HR actions would follow. My manager didn't look at me as he gathered his things from his desk. I didn't look at him either. Eye contact wasn't necessary anymore. In the days that followed, people apologized quietly. They came to my desk and said things like, I should have known, or, I'm sorry I didn't realize. I accepted without comment. I didn't need their validation. I needed closure. Closure had arrived. Compliance thanked me for my professionalism and honesty. The CEO sent a brief note. 2 sentences. Excellent work on the framework. Looking forward to what's next. Enough. My calendar filled with new meetings, new responsibilities, new projects. Earned, not given. The difference mattered. The office settled into a new rhythm. The framework now carried a neutral name in official documents. My name appeared where it belonged, in documentation, in credit lines, in presentations. Not as a footnote, as the creator. I worked steadily, without urgency or the need to prove anything. I noticed how people listened differently now. How interruptions stopped. How conversations shifted when I entered a room. Respect didn't arrive as praise or loud acknowledgement. It arrived as space. as people giving me room to work, to speak, to exist without constant challenge. My former manager was placed on leave pending the full HR review. I felt no satisfaction in that. No joy or vindication. Only relief. Systems had worked exactly as they were supposed to. I hadn't broken myself to be seen. It stayed intact. That mattered more than any form of revenge could ever matter. One evening, alone in the office, I opened my original notebook. Observations. I flipped through pages of my own handwriting documenting months of stolen credit and unspoken anger. I closed it slowly and slid it into my bag. I wouldn't need it anymore. The timeline was official now. The documentation was company record. The truth was established. What stayed with me wasn't anger or bitterness. It was clarity. Silence isn't weakness when paired with preparation. Patience isn't passivity when guided by truth. Both are strategic tools. Both are forms of power. I shut off the lights in the office and left without looking back. Some battles don't end with noise or confrontation. They end with alignment. They end with the truth becoming undeniable. Weeks later, the CEO called me directly. Short conversation. Clear expectations. New opportunity. Promotion. Leadership in my own right. New team. New budget. New authority. I thanked him and ended the call. No celebration. No announcement. Just movement forward. My manager's name faded from conversations. Mine stayed. Quietly. Permanently. In documents. In emails. In the official record of who built what and when they built it. At my desk, I opened a new document. Blank. No history yet. No edit trails. No previous versions. Just a blank page waiting to be filled. Smiled. This time, everyone knew exactly where it would begin. They knew exactly who would build it. There would be no confusion. No stolen credit. No lies. I started typing, my fingers moving across the keyboard with confidence. The work was mine. The vision was mine. The execution would be mine. And everyone in this office now understood that absolutely. I wasn't fighting for recognition anymore. I was simply doing what I'd always done, excellent work. But this time my name would be on it from the beginning to the end. That was the real victory. Not revenge. Just truth finally aligned with reality. Months passed. The framework became company standard. My name was synonymous with the work. New opportunities came. Speaking engagements. Recognition. Genuine respect from colleagues who'd watched the truth unfold. But the best part wasn't the promotion or the recognition. It was the peace. It was knowing that I'd won by staying true to myself. I hadn't compromised my integrity. I hadn't broken any rules. I'd simply let the truth exist and allowed the system to work as it was designed to work. My former manager never returned to the company. His contract was terminated after the full review concluded. I didn't attend any meetings about that. I didn't celebrate it. I simply continued my work. The lesson I'd learned was this. The strongest revenge isn't the loudest or the most dramatic. It's the most patient. It's the kind that builds itself on truth and lets liars destroy themselves with their own arrogance. I started mentoring junior employees, teaching them what I'd learned. I told them that their work mattered, that documentation mattered, that staying calm mattered, that patience mattered. I told them never to accept stolen credit silently, but also never to respond with anger or desperation. I told them that the truth, properly documented and strategically revealed, was more powerful than any accusation could ever be. They listened. Some understood immediately. Others learned the hard way just like I had. My career trajectory changed completely. I was no longer just an analyst executing someone else's vision. I was a strategist, leader, someone whose name meant something in the industry. Clients specifically requested me. Companies wanted to hire me away. But I stayed. I stayed because I'd built something real here. I'd built a reputation on truth. I'd built respect through integrity. That was worth more than any paycheck. A year later, I was in the same boardroom where everything had changed. Different presentation. Different project. Different audience. The CEO was there again, watching. Observing. Always observing. When I finished my presentation, he nodded once and said, "This is exactly what I expected from you." Not what he hoped for. What he expected. Confidence in my work based on demonstrated ability and integrity. After the meeting, he asked me to join him for coffee. We talked about the company's future. About my role in that future. About leadership and integrity and the kind of culture we wanted to build. He told me something I'll never forget. People like you don't succeed because they're the loudest in the room. They succeed because they're the most reliable. You proved that. I thanked him and meant it. Not for the compliment but for allowing the system to work. For trusting truth over convenient lies. Months turned into a year. Then 2 years. My former manager faded from company memory entirely. New people came who'd never even heard his name. My name, on the other hand, became the standard. The framework I'd built was taught in the industry. Other companies studied our approach. Universities used our methodology as a case study in effective project management and collaborative work. I'd won, but not in the way I'd originally imagined victory. I hadn't destroyed my manager. He'd destroyed himself. I hadn't exposed him dramatically. The system had. I'd simply stayed true to the work, documented everything, and let patience do its job. And in winning that way, in preserving my own integrity through the entire process, I'd gained something more valuable than revenge. I'd gained respect. Real respect. The kind that lasts. Years later, I rarely thought about what had happened. It didn't hurt anymore. It didn't make me angry. It was simply a chapter in my career. A test I'd passed by refusing to compromise who I was. I'd learned that the strongest form of victory isn't the loudest or the most dramatic. It's the most sustainable. It's the kind that lets you look at yourself in the mirror and know that you won by being better. Not by being ruthless. Not by breaking rules. But by being smarter, more patient, and absolutely committed to the truth. People sometimes ask me how I'd done it. How I'd stayed so calm while watching him take credit. How I hadn't exploded or confronted him or gone to HR immediately with accusations. The truth was simple. I'd learned something most people never understand. Fighting fire with fire just burns the whole house down. But letting the fire burn itself out, documenting the fuel, understanding the oxygen, watching the arsonist light the match, that's strategy. That's power. That's victory that doesn't cost you your soul. I opened a new document at my desk, just like I had years before. Blank page. Full of possibility. But this time I wasn't fighting. I wasn't documenting evidence. I wasn't preparing for battle. I was simply creating, building, moving forward. My name would be on this work from start to finish. Everyone knew it would be. Everyone expected it would be. That was the real victory. Not the revenge. Just the simple, undeniable truth that some people are worth their own name. Some people earn their place. Some people don't need to scream to be heard. I smiled and started typing. The work continued. My work. My vision. My execution. My success. And that finally was enough.